Thanks for tuning in. I'm Andy Zopp, and this is Chicago Newsroom 2.0. At the roundtable this week, we'll discuss the latest developments related to CPS and CTU contract talks, the newest names to the corporate DEI rollback list, and the summoning of Mayor Johnson to Washington, D.C. to explain Chicago's commitment to being a sanctuary city. I'll also sit one-on-one with 36th Ward Alderman Gilbert Villegas and Metro Edge Development Partners CEO Craig Huffman to discuss the city's new Data Residency Ordinance and what it means for Chicagoans like you and me. We'll get started on the other side of a short break. Stay with us. Hi, I'm Robin Robinson, inviting you to tune in to the new CAN TV original program, In Other News. Each week, I will break down newsworthy topics that traditional outlets may ignore, grounded in truth, fun, and blackness, from the trap house to the White House, with the big house in between. Join the conversation on CAN TV Cable Channel 19, or stream live on cantv.org or on the CAN TV Plus app. Hyper-local news and critical analysis. Experience the power of community television. As Chicago continues to evolve as a tech and data-driven city, questions around data privacy, security, and economic impact are taking center stage. At the forefront of this conversation is Chicago's new Data Residency Ordinance, a groundbreaking policy designed to keep sensitive data housed right here within city limits. This legislation has significant implications for businesses, residents, and the future of Chicago's digital infrastructure. Joining us today to break it all down are two key voices in this space: Alderman Gilbert Villegas, one of the ordinance's lead sponsors, and Craig Huffman, co-founder of Metro Edge, a company at the forefront of Chicago's data center innovation. Alderman Villegas, welcome back. Craig, welcome.
Thank you.
So, what the heck is the Data Residency Ordinance?
Listen, this is about taking an asset and looking at data as an asset. Yeah. The government produces a ton of data, not just within the city of Chicago government, but its sister agencies as well. And figuring out how to leverage that to create physical infrastructure assets. So right now, hyperscalers like Amazon, Oracle, Google, they'll take our data and then they'll store it somewhere in the cloud, right? Infamous cloud, which is really just a data center with a bunch of servers. Right. That's the cloud. But those data centers are not housed in Chicago proper. Some may be located in Illinois, some may be located in Kentucky, some may be located overseas. Yeah. And so we're trying to figure out, with all the data that we're producing, how can we leverage that to get physical investments? And so when we put forward this ordinance, we had a lot of discussions about how that will look like. We know that right now the state of Illinois has a bunch of incentives to entice developers to come here. But we were looking at it from a city as like, well, how can we get them into the city of Chicago proper? And so we developed this ordinance that puts an incentive on the back end. So once a hyperscaler has demonstrated that our data is being stored in Chicago, there's a 4% incentive. If it's stored in the state of Illinois, there's a 2% incentive. We're competing against right-to-work states, and so that we know that we're at a disadvantage. So we're trying to get that physical investment. Right.
Wow. So Craig, tell us, what does Metro Edge do exactly?
So Metro Edge is a commercial real estate firm. We currently are pursuing a development of a data center on actually not far from here. Prior to the launch of Metro Edge, for 20 years, I ran a real estate private equity firm that I co-founded with partners.
I recall.
Yes.
So tell us how this ordinance is impactful for the work that you're doing in the data center space and the data center development space.
So for the last few years, I've pursued an opportunity here in the medical district. And one of the things that became clear is that the city of Chicago has a pretty substantial spend. Mm-hmm. I think when you add sister agencies and the corporate office, it's probably close to $800 million a year. A lot of that spend goes to hyperscalers such as Oracle, Microsoft, Amazon. And what happens is interesting. The data, the city data, is not necessarily stored inside Chicago. Why is that relevant? Because data centers produce a tremendous amount of property tax revenue. Mm-hmm. Communities such as Elk Grove Village, Aurora, other communities have seen tremendous tax revenue benefits. And our argument was, if the city's spending the money, we should be leveraging that spend.
Leveraging that spend by bringing, and so then this requires companies like Oracle and Google who use and take our data.
Encourages, doesn't require.
Encourages them, incents them.
Yes.
To put their money in data centers here. Is that how that works?
Yeah, so basically taking the data that we have to store somewhere.
Right.
And then saying, listen, if you're really committed to working with Chicago, there should be some type of physical structure that we can leverage as well for property taxes. So that way the residents of Chicago are also benefiting from this type of investment as well.
Right.
And so, initially some of the hyperscalers were opposed to it because they didn't want to be told where to store their data. And I said, well, it's not a requirement. There's an incentive. The profit margins within storing data is very minimal. So if you want to get an incentive, then store it here locally, and then we could both win.
Right, and the upside for the city is what?
For the upside for the city is taking a look at vacant land that's underutilized right now, putting it back on the tax roll, creating some temporary construction jobs, union jobs, and then also having some temporary jobs at the data center itself, but also business associated with it. So if you take a look, you got to have the servers dusted, you got to have cleaning. So there's a lot of things that can happen with it.
Right. So there are workforce opportunities, obviously economic development.
Correct.
Because you put the data center in places that are otherwise, as you said, Craig, open spaces, open lots, right? Or empty.
Well,
lots.
If you go back in 1975, there were 750,000 manufacturing jobs in Chicago. Right. Many of those jobs are gone. We now have about 60,000. Why is that relevant? The jobs won't come back from data centers, but many of the sites, the U.S. Steel site, some of the other areas of the city still have been vacant. And the idea is, how do we reimagine how these pieces of land that are now vacant, but once were vibrant locations for employment, tax revenue, how do we rethink? That's what Elk Grove Village did, and it's had tremendous results in terms of new tax revenue.
Right.
Yeah, and if you take a look at Virginia as well, Virginia is kind of the model.
Right.
They 10 years ago, they were $100 million in property tax. Now they're $1 billion in property tax based off that, and they're using
from putting in data centers
because they're using all of the federal government agencies that have to store data right in Virginia.
Right. Wow. Well, that would be terrific for us. Are there? I didn't really even think about it until you started talking about it. All the data. Personal data and just data generally that the city has and manages. What for Chicagoans and my listeners, how does this impact data privacy and security? Are there restrictions or are there requirements on the data centers in terms of how they protect our data?
Well, there's already a process in place. This is no different. Right. Whether you're storing data in Kentucky, Virginia, Iowa, there's already a process in place. So this would just make it a lot closer. And again, we can benefit off that asset, off the property taxes and the actual investment. Illinois is positioned perfectly for data centers, given the fact that we have a lot of nuclear plants around in Illinois, and so we're producing a ton of energy that we have to export to other places. So we're really centrally located. I think we're number 3 in the country right now, but there's an opportunity to get to number 1.
Number 3 in data centers?
Data centers, yes.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
See, I thought we were further behind.
No.
Well, that's good to know. Now we need to get to number 1,
exactly.
right?
That's what we're trying to do here.
It says, well, as usual, you are on the cutting edge of what's important, right? I think most people aren't thinking about that connection between your data and those dollars going to some other place, a city, state. And so making that tie and incenting companies to come build data centers, store their data here is really important. So.
Well, I tell you, the government has to get more creative because the reality is that in order to fund government, we just can't continue to pull the same levers of property taxes, fines, fees, and TIF surplus. We got to create new revenue, and this is an opportunity to do that. And so we're going to explore it. Right. And from an appropriator that eventually at some point needs to create revenue, I'm looking for new options because property taxes is not something that's very popular right now.
No, or it's absolutely right. Plus, repurposing, Craig, as you said, the other sites that aren't otherwise being used makes perfect sense. So.
And I think there's an opportunity to bring new faces, new voices. I have to be careful how I say it with the attack on DEI, but the data center industry is not diverse.
Right.
I am the only person with my tan in Illinois, and I've been told the country. to be in a position to break ground on a world-class data center.
Well, don't worry about it. We're not going to let DEI, we're not going to let DEI, DIE.
There you go. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you both for being here and talking about this really important topic that I think is going to be news to my viewers. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you both.
Thank you.
On the other side of the break, I'll be joined by our roundtable regulars to unpack news coming out of CPS, City Hall, and the latest fallout over DEI rollbacks. Stay with us.
Every community has a story, a pulse, a voice waiting to be heard. At CAN TV, we bring these stories to light, from the heart of Chicago to your living room. Join us in supporting hyper-local television. Your backing helps us cover what matters directly in our communities, unfiltered and upfront. Help tell the important stories of our communities. Become a program underwriter today.
Corporate America is pulling back on diversity commitments. The Chicago Teachers Union is locked in high-stakes contract talks with CPS, and Mayor Brandon Johnson is heading to Washington to testify before Congress. What's driving these headlines, and what do they mean for Chicago's future? Joining me to break all of it down is our expert panel of roundtable regulars, Block Club Chicago reporter Francia Garcia Hernandez, City Bureau Executive Director Morgan Malone, and the co-founder of Just Act Partners, Juatise Gathings. Francia, Morgan, Juatise, welcome back.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Let's get to it. So let's start first with the first part is, as of February 2025, several companies have publicly announced changes to their DE&I programs. For our viewers, let me run the list down for you. Google, Meta Platforms, Facebook and Instagram, Amazon, Walmart, McDonald's, Ford Motor Company, Lowe's, and British Telecommunications, which is otherwise known as BT. Conversely, for those of you who are tracking, here are the companies that are reaffirm their commitment to DE&I. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase and Company, Costco, Apple, Microsoft, Nike, ELF Beauty, and Johnson & Johnson. So let's talk a little bit about the response, for example, to some of these, like Target's been under attack. Very kind of vicious response. Their shareholders are responding. There's been a lawsuit and a boycott. So what do you think? Are people actually paying attention?
I think in the case of Target, there was activist groups and different community members who responded to these because Target was very vocal at the time of George Floyd's murder and the Black Lives Matter movement. They were very vocal about standing up for rights and protecting the LGBTQ plus community and Black people and Latino communities. They've rolled out products, they've brought in brands from different creators in these communities, and now that the political climate has shifted, they said, oh, we're pulling back. So this has been a very visible target to many people, as their name, funnily is the same, just because of their stance and how visible it is that now they're completely switching to another point of view.
How should we, Morgan? How should people think about these pullbacks? Because they always go like, well, we're still committed to everybody, but we're just going to change how we think about it and talk about it. Is that really what they mean, or are they really just saying, you know what, we're not? This is just not going to be a thing for us anymore?
I think that there's something to the commodification of culture. People believing that, it's an influencer marketing strategy. I'm not going to do not only Black and LGBT and women, I'm going to choose the most visible influencers. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it with somebody like Tabitha Brown. When you do something like that, though, she has a multi-million person following. The second you roll back, now the same influencers that you invested in, there's voice for everybody to circle back and say, actually, you did that to my favorite person. And so to the degree that people are emotionally attached to Target, to the degree that people are emotionally attached to their favorite cultural influencers who were in these campaigns, way more attached to that than I think some folks are to the commitment from Target. And so it looks like you're doing something to Kalana Barfield Brown, you're doing something to Tabitha Brown, and these are people that I really value. why. People have an emotional attachment to those influencers, so it's not just a marketing strategy.
Right. So how about is the answer boycott? I mean, the boycott against Target, Juatise, appears to be having some impact. Should we? And I know that there's kind of some people have been talking about boycotting Facebook, and I haven't heard anybody say they're going to boycott Instagram yet, given the TikTok issues. But I mean, does boycott matter? How should people respond to this list?
I mean, I think it does. I mean, I think in response to the list in particular, I mean, when you look at the names on the list, a lot of those companies are closely aligned with what you've seen in the media from their leaders, right? Where they're donating their money, who they supported on the political campaign. So none of what you said is surprising. I happen to be a big tennis shoe connoisseur, so I'm happy to see that Nike's on the more favorable side of this conversation. But I also think about, how quickly the leaders made the decisions. Because if you think about where we are in this point in the journey, I think we know where the administration would like for us to head with the conversation of DEI, but nothing has happened to force them to make these decisions yet. And so it's closely aligned with what the leaders believe in the hearts. And as a business leader, I sit around with different executives and CEOs all the time. And those who never believed, never had it embedded in their strategies are the ones who are starting to question, what's coming our way. Whereas others who truly believe that DEI is a result of better business, better diversity, better thought leadership, and serving their consumers, I think that those are the leaders that you see on that list that no matter where the legislation lies, they believe it's not just good impact, but it's good for business, and that's why they're doubling down on it. So I do think boycotting is the answer. As Black people, we have to understand our buying power, and Target is starting to experience that. And so I think it is a brilliant strategy for us to continue to do.
Right. There's lots of data that says diverse entities that are more diverse and have more women in their leadership perform better. There is, the population, the workforce is getting more diverse. It's going to have more color and women. As a business person, how do you simply say, I'm just not going to do anything that's going to make it better, make it equal for equity and make it work for all of my employees and my competitiveness? Does that make any sense from a business perspective?
I mean, it doesn't, but we know that power gives nothing without a demand. And these policies were so critical because it demanded something of leaders. If there's nothing demanded of them, they're not going to behave to that expectation. And so I do believe that leaders have this perspective that DEI is a distraction or caused our workforce to be more, weaker or whatever that may be, but the data proves otherwise. And so in my mind, it is a hard issue unique to the leader, which is why representation is so important, as why people having representation on corporate boards is so important, because these type of decisions are now being made in a vacuum because it's about power and control and less about the consumers in which they serve. And so the only thing we can do at this point is continue to double down on it, but also take our buying power back and go to the alternatives that we know are going to support us in our communities.
Great point. I knew you would be able to give me that. Give me a great point. Yeah. So let's, before I get super frustrated, let's move on to a new topic. Let's talk a little bit about CTU and the teachers union and their contract. They still don't have one. They got a fact finder and that is really someone who's supposed to be neutral, who's supposed to take the facts and then put out a report and say, here's kind of the lay of the land. So it's supposed to take out all the bias and objective, and CTU rejected that. What does that mean for the process, Morgan?
Historically, anytime CTU has rejected the fact-finding report, they strike.
Oh, wow.
I'm just not sure in this moment that the members will vote to strike, nor am I sure that Chicagoans have the appetite to deal with it right now. Another strike, especially the last few, Chicagoans and Chicago parents, especially post-pandemic, are just not up for it. And so I don't know, based on the polls that we're seeing, their favorability for parents willing to support the CTU with the strike is low. Right. And I don't know that it's also politically expedient for them to strike on the mayor that they supported electing, because it's not as if he hasn't done everything he could do or pulled every lever he could pull to get to the same outcomes they're looking for.
To his political detriment, right? And so one could argue.
And so I'm not sure that there's value in it. I do think it's possible and potentially likely that they do strike, but I don't know that in the end, there's any net positive outcome that comes from it.
No, I mean, my sense would be, I don't know, Francia, what do you think? If they strike, it's going to be a long one because there's no middle ground here. They're like way over here and CPS is way over here. How do we resolve that?
Yeah. Some of the issues, they've come to an agreement and they've talked about it earlier this year, but there are still issues that CPS and CTU have very different positions on. Some of them have more room for compromise, like classroom sizes. They want a certain number. CPS is proposing a certain number. It could be like a middle ground, potentially. Raises and salary increases are something that's still being, negotiated. Some other policies or other proposals brought forward by the CTU have been accepted, such as like sustainable schools. Some are still like in negotiations. Many of them come back to the fundamental question of funding, right? Mm-hmm. What can CPS afford to do? CTU is saying you have the capacity or the capacity to borrow. CPS says we don't know that we have that capacity to keep borrowing and putting more debt into the district. So it is a potentially contentious strike if it were to happen, just because of these very different points of view and these common ground is not there when it comes to funding, and that seems to be the reason why other issues have not been resolved.
Right.
The CTU did concede that this is the most favorable fact-finding report they've ever received.
Right.
And in some places, they are a lot closer to certain goals that are long-term goals and farther apart on others. And so compromise, we're not going to get everything, but it does feel like they're closer now than any other previous negotiation that's happened.
Right. Yeah. All the more reason to get to agreement, would seem to me.
Certainly, and that's the point I was just going to lay out. I mean, if you look at the actual components of the fact-finding report, it's my strong opinion that the topics that CTU cared about are amongst teacher wages, et cetera. The report clearly calls out that CPS has the capacity to give in some of those areas. And the other smaller, more nuanced areas, they didn't necessarily hurt CTU in the bargain or hinder them in the sense that they, send it back to the two parties to have a conversation about. So I do believe CTU should feel really good about their leverage in this, considering what the fact-finding report said, which historically had favored, CPS's side of the argument. But I do believe that there's an opportunity for them to come to the end of the table. But I do think that it's not favorable for Mayor Johnson to have to deal with this, especially in this political climate, considering his support of CTU and him doing everything in his power. It speaks to their relationship with the administration more so than their relationship with CPS. And so I don't know that anybody wins with a strike.
Yeah. Totally agree with that. So we have a little bit of time left. So speaking of Mayor Johnson, he's going to Washington to talk about sanctuary cities, along with a bunch of other mayors. So, is this just an opportunity for the conservative or Republicans in Congress to beat up on the mayors of sanctuary cities? Or is this actually an opportunity for him to really explain on a more public platform what he's trying to accomplish here?
I would hope that it's the latter and that he will take this opportunity to really highlight facts about immigrant communities, about what sanctuary protections do and don't do, and really counter this narrative that has been built by the federal administration and a lot of people who are anti-immigrant who say criminals, immigrants are criminals, or they do not get access to local and county jails where these violent, dangerous criminals are, or like the worst are going first, which is just, again, a narrative that is based on false information that doesn't highlight the contributions of immigrants to the economy and the cultural diversity of this country, and that doesn't really explain what sanctuary protections do and don't do. Right. They do not limit federal authorities from coming to Chicago and enforcing laws. Right. They only limit police from cooperating and trying to understand whether someone is here as a legal or undocumented immigrant. And immigration law, by the way, is very complicated, so we do not need police officers doing the job of immigration officials who have been trained to do that. So I hope that it's the opportunity for Mayor Brandon Johnson to put that on the table and really explain what sanctuary protections are and what immigrant communities do for a city like Chicago and many other cities.
Right. Wow. Well said. We couldn't say that any better. So, and which is good because we're out of time. But that's a great point, and I hope that Mayor Johnson and the other mayors do exactly that. right? Use this opportunity to talk rationally about what it is we're trying to do here in Chicago, which is protect all of our residents and keep everybody safe. So thank you, all of you, Francia, Morgan, Juatise, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. It was, as usual, a great conversation. On the other side of the break, I'm back with some final thoughts. Stay with us.
CAN TV is the lens through which Chicago's stories are told, harnessing the unifying power of community television. With CAN TV On Demand, immerse yourself in the richness of our city through exclusive stories and programs tailored just for you, connecting you to the heartbeats of our streets, the voices of our people, and the spirit that makes Chicago unique. Discover the strength of your community on CAN TV On Demand.
In times of political upheaval, distraction becomes a tool of oppression. The chaos, the noise, and the endless stream of headlines are designed to pull our attention in 1,000 directions, diluting the power of our collective focus. But now, more than ever, we cannot afford to be distracted. The fight for justice and equity requires intention, surgical focus, and unyielding discipline. Across the country, we're witnessing rollbacks of hard-won progress. Corporate commitments to diversity are being scaled back. Policies that once seemed untouchable are under threat, and the political landscape is shifting in ways that demand our vigilance. It's easy to get overwhelmed, to feel paralyzed by the magnitude of what's unfolding. But this is not the time to retreat into apathy or despair. Progress has never been a straight line. It's forged in moments like these, when the path forward is murky, when the stakes are high, and when the temptation to look away feels strongest. But history has shown us that transformative change is born from persistent, focused action. The civil rights movement of the past weren't fueled by convenience. They were powered by disciplined communities who refused to be distracted from their mission. So what does focus look like today? It means staying informed without becoming overwhelmed. It means channeling outrage into organized action, not aimless frustration. It means supporting grassroots movements, holding leaders accountable, and keeping equity and justice at the center of every conversation. It also means caring for ourselves and each other. Burnout is a real threat in prolonged struggles, and rest is a radical act of resistance. We cannot pour from an empty cup. Our well-being is not a luxury, it's a necessity for sustaining the fight. As we navigate this era of uncertainty, let's remember distraction is a tool, but so is focus. The forces working against justice are counting on our attention to scatter. Let's prove them wrong. Let's move with intention, speak with clarity, and act with purpose. The fight isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning. Stay focused, stay disciplined, and above all, stay committed. Thank you for tuning in, Chicago. That's our time for this week. We're back next week with an all-new edition of Chicago Newsroom 2.0. Until then, be well and well-informed.